Good morning, Ben.
So it's an exciting day for these retailers. We can see from Nick's report how keen they all are to get their doors open, to get the customers back in. But of course, there is still this fear, isn't there, that actually we're taking too much of a chance and that the second spike that no one wants to see has a chance if we start opening too quickly. How concerned are you that actually the pressure that you've had from the Republic, because I know that their shops have opened a bit sooner than yours, has forced your hand a bit here?
Well, I don't think that that's the case at all, Ben. We have had our own plan. We launched it back on the 12th of May. And in that plan, we said that we would take a step-by-step process out of the lockdown, and we would do it in a way that didn't have a cumulative impact upon the transmission of the virus. We've been taking steps to come out. We do that in a gradual way, and we think that now is the right time to open all of retail and allow people to come together outside in groups of 10. And also to allow people living on their own to come together with another household. 27% of our households here in Northern Ireland are people living on their own, and we're very conscious that there's a social isolation problem there. So that's why we decided to do that yesterday as well.
And Arlene Foster, there is a question now, isn't there, about how you get schools back, for example, and restaurants and pubs and the hospitality industry across the whole of the UK, and no different in Northern Ireland. Where do you stand on this idea of the 2-metre social distancing? Because clearly the scientists on one hand who are advising government are saying, look, that is probably the safest place to be. But other countries, France, Germany, other places have gone down to 1 metre or 1.5 metres. It would help the economy and schools, wouldn't it, if that distance was reduced?
Well, Ranvi, you're absolutely right. The two sectors that this impacts upon the most is tourism and the schools. We here in Northern Ireland have a different term time for schools, so we would be naturally coming to the end of our term time at the end of June. So it's likely that the children will be going back to school in late August now. Normally it's usually the beginning of September. But what we want to do is to look at the whole area of social distancing, the totality of it. So not just the 2-metre rule, but the fact of what is it we can do to mitigate the risk if you move from 2 metres. How can you manage that in a way that isn't too difficult for little children? It's difficult enough to tell children to stay apart, but to make sure that they're apart for 2 metres is going to be a real challenge. Therefore, we need to look at other mitigating circumstances, and the executive is doing that at the moment with their medical advisors.
And do you think you've had, am I right in saying that I think you've had 4 days consecutively where you've had no deaths from coronavirus, but I think you may have had one recently, sadly. But in a way, you are obviously ahead of where the rest of, well, England certainly are in terms of its decrease in infection rates. For you, has it turned from being solely a health crisis into now being, has it got to that tipping point where it is now more of an economic crisis? Because we had the figures out this morning that the economy of the UK shrunk by 20% in April. Has it got to that point now where the economy is now, in a way, the #1 priority?
Yeah, so this week we had 4 days in succession without a death, and then just yesterday we had 1 death. So we have been able to push the virus down and to limit the number of deaths, and we're pleased about that. But we've always been very cognizant of the fact that, as well as the dealing with COVID-19, there are a whole range of other issues that have had a negative impact upon Northern Ireland, not least the non-COVID healthcare. How are we dealing with people with cancer and with other issues, strokes, heart attacks? And then, of course, there's the economic damage that COVID-19 has inflicted upon us. And then the societal challenges. I've already talked about social isolation, mental health issues that we will have to deal with. So there's a whole societal issue that we will have to deal with here in Northern Ireland, and we're very conscious of all of that, Ranvi.
Arlene Foster, one of the major issues that we are certainly all dealing with right now is the increased focus on some of the statues that we have as representations of former members of our communities, both over there in Northern Ireland and all around the UK. And I'm sure you've been following this with interest. We've seen the result of what happened at the protest on Sunday in Bristol, with Edward Colston ending up in Bristol Harbour. He was a person that had a huge impact on the communities in Bristol, but also had lots of links with slave trade and had been importing slaves for many years during his lifetime. There are growing calls now. St Thomas's guys in St Thomas's Hospital are talking about removing 2 statues this morning. Robert Baden-Powell yesterday was nearly removed from Poole Harbour by the council there as a means of protecting his statue due to his links, previous links, known links with homophobia and the Nazis. He's actually now being protected by community members there who don't want to see him removed. And I know that there's growing calls for a statue of Oliver Cromwell to remove from outside the Houses of Parliament in London. You know, he sort of is a highly sort of a well-known historical figure, infamously enacted a series of brutal military dictates that led to the death of countless innocent Irish civilians. We're talking hundreds of years ago, of course. I wonder what your position is on this, on sort of the removal of some of these statues that in their past and in their history, despite what they ended up achieving, have had a detrimental effect on the communities and certainly your community.
Well, first of all, let me say I think it's incredibly sad to see the cenotaph having to be boarded up in the fashion that it has been. The fact that we have to protect the statue of one of our greatest leaders, Winston Churchill, in the fashion that we have and the way in which it was attacked last week. People need to reflect on the fact that we're living in the 21st century. We're living in a totally different era. That's absolutely right. And we have different values than certainly in Oliver Cromwell's time and in the 18th and 19th centuries. And I think it's wrong to erase history. Obviously, we have to have a balanced look back at history and to realise what has happened in the past and where we are today and the progress that has been made. But I do think it's wrong. I can understand the desire, of course, of people to protest about the death of George Floyd in America and the Black Lives Matters protests. But to attack cultural icons such as Winston Churchill, I think, is an incredibly sad indictment of where the United Kingdom is today. As a former Girl Guide leader and member of the Girl Guide organisation, I know the good that Baden-Powell's organisation has done right across the world, and I think it's so sad to see his statue having to be protected by members of the Scouting movement at this time.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that it's all, to me, feels like a sort of metaphorical call for real change, and I think banning things, taking things off streaming services and taking statues down is a sort of visceral way of people saying, look, I think something more deeper has to change. The curriculum has to change. We have to, from primary schools, teach people about the realities of what Great Britain was all about and the people that we are seeing and we see statues of. Would you welcome a sort of a fundamental change in the way we discuss our history and the people in it? And that would be, in a way, much more powerful than taking statues down in the first instance.
Well, I think coming from Northern Ireland, and people often accuse us of spending far too much time looking backwards instead of looking forwards, it is important that people understand their history, understand why things happened in the past, why they wouldn't happen today. So I think a balanced conversation about where we are as a United Kingdom today would be something absolutely to be welcomed, and then people could understand why those statues were put up in the first place and why people wanted to remember those particular, and it usually is always men, why those people wanted to remember those men at that particular point in time. I do think we need to step back, Ranveer, and to have those conversations in a balanced way and in a way that respects the past but looks to the future.
And one last question, Arlene Foster, as the shops open, I wonder what the first shop you might be visiting for a bit of retail therapy today will be?
Well, let me say this, Ben, I'm looking forward to the hairdressers opening more than anything else in the world.
When is that? Is that June, end of June
looking
for you
forward
guys?
to doing that in the future.
When do you think the hairdressers will open? Actually, it's quite an important point, really. So I think in the Republic they're opening at the end of
It's a very
June.
important.
Yeah.
It's a very important point. It's one I receive many emails about from many females right across Northern Ireland, I have to say. We'll be discussing indicative dates next week, and we hope to be able to bring some joy to many of the females right across Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Well, I have to say you're looking very polished this morning.
Absolutely.
Do you have any tips on how to keep your hair neat and tidy during this?
In a wind as well.
This pandemic would be
the
lovely.
First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking to a Texan
We
hairdresser
are.
a little bit later.